Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. Joining me now is Drew Benbow, attorney and author of The Devil's Politics. Drew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
We are happy to have you. So you are originally from DC, so from an early age, you have been adjacent to the political arena. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you wanted to become involved in the political space?
Sure. I am from DC. Like you said, I grew up in Southeast DC, Anacostia, during a time when DC was the murder and drug capital for several consecutive years. And I grew up right in the middle of that. And so growing up and being in my neighborhood in Anacostia, seeing all the crime and the drugs and everything that I saw, and then going downtown and seeing a whole different society, essentially, I immediately was interested from a very young age. So that's how I ended up there. So I joined the Army. I spent 20 years in the Army Reserve. I deployed 4 times to the Middle East, including to Afghanistan. Went to law school, and that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up in politics.
So you did it all. So I do want to talk about your Army experience. You're an Army veteran. You spent 2 decades in the military. How has that experience really shaped the way you view political engagement?
Well, if you're in the military, you know for sure that things that happen can directly impact you. So being in the military, I've been deployed to Kuwait, Afghanistan, and I've been watching the news there. And then that very day, something that I heard come from the White House or from the Defense Department changed the entire mission. So you have a direct. It's direct. The impact is direct and sometimes immediate.
So do you equate that with voting? Like voting can also be direct?
It can be direct, but I think many people don't see it as such. Many people see the things that they care about most is the economy and their personal economy, right? They care about the fact that, maybe I have more month at the end of the money as opposed to the other way around. And so, so they're worrying about the day-to-day things. And so for most people, local politics impacts them more quickly and more, I guess, acutely, at least in their perspective.
Sure. And so then what led you to write The Devil's Politics? And can you give us a brief synopsis?
Sure, let's start with the synopsis. So The Devil's Politics is a tale. It's a fictional account of 2 Black men who are from the South who grow up on diverging paths. One, the main character, ends up working as a low-level staffer for a Republican member of Congress. He's forced to grapple with his identity as a Black man who's Republican and who also cares about the plight of Black America. I began to write this book at the end of August, at the end of 2020, in the height of the pandemic. I had a tremendous amount of time, like many of us did. I was in the house and I was watching everything happening around the world. Right here in DC, we had the riot, or I would say the protest, I should say, in DC. And when you're thinking about these things, you start to think about, well, why are these things happening? What can change? And so The Devil's Politics is essentially my manifesto for how I think things can change for the Black community.
Can you speak to that? Because I was listening to one of your book talks for the book, and you said this really similar thing. You said that the book is your political manifesto for how you reimagine Black participation in the American political system. Can you expand?
Sure. So we as Black Americans vote almost exclusively for the Democratic Party. I think that strategically works to our detriment because what happens when you vote one party is that there's no competition for your vote. The Democrats take your vote for granted because they know they're going to get your vote. So when they come to us, they say, vote for us, not vote for us Democrats, because they don't give us an agenda. They don't give us a platform. They don't court our vote for their policy. Republicans don't court our vote because they know our vote is going to the Democrats. So essentially what you have is 2 parties who are not on the hook for doing anything for a whole segment of the electorate. Imagine, I guess for the sports fans out there, let's say you like basketball Imagine playing a full court game of basketball in the NBA, and your team cannot go beyond half court. You cannot win a game that way. So we are loaded almost totally on one side of the aisle. And you cannot win a game like you can't even play, you can't even be competitive in that way.
So let's take a step back here. What do you think for both parties? It sounds like they're both missing the mark. So what do you think they could do to be more representative of Black voters?
So I think, first of all, they should actually court the Black vote. But more than that, it's sort of a chicken or the egg sort of thing. I think that Black Americans, we should get to the point where we're running Black Black members of Congress, Black senators, and Black elected officials throughout this country, so that the Republicans know that they have a chance with us, and so the Democrats know that they could potentially lose our vote. Imagine if Apple were the only smartphone maker in the game. There would be no incentive for the company to make a faster processor or a better camera. But because there's competition, when one company improves its product, the other company has to try to one up it. So who wins? The consumer. The same is the case in politics.
So, according to exit polling from ABC, quote, Black voters went for Democrats 73 points over Republicans in the 2022 midterms. So, just to your point, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the rhetoric that Black Americans hear from Republicans. It has a lot to do with even some of the policies. Many of the policies, many Black Americans feel as if they cannot get behind the policies. But between the rhetoric and the policies, and also there's sort of a stigma in our community that says that if you are Black and you are Republican, then you somehow are the devil, hence the devil's politics.
So, what do you think the GOP could do to attract more Black voters?
Sure, I think the GOP should court the Black vote. The GOP should run Black members of Congress, run Black elected officials throughout the country, and court the Black vote. And once they see that and they begin to change their rhetoric, then they may see that we are more attracted to that we're going to make a choice between the Democrats and the Republicans.
So, I do now want to talk about the 2022 midterms a little more broadly. Who do you think were the biggest winners and losers this past election day?
I think the biggest winners were undoubtedly the Democrats. So the Republicans have predicted this big red wave that was supposed to flow throughout the country, and we did not see that. I think there was a negative mandate against Donald Trump and his ilk. If you were an election denier, then you saw that you didn't win. So I think about Donald Baldock out in New Hampshire. I worked for him. I know him. I worked for him when I was in the Army years ago out in Europe. He was an election denier, and he saw that he was denied his election. You have the same thing that happened out in Arizona. Now, if you go down into Georgia, you have Senator Warnock and Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker appeared to have learned his lesson in the debates when he was asked directly, if you lose, are you going to accept your loss? He said unequivocally, yes, I will. So he's looked around and he's learned his lesson. And I think that's anybody's race on December 6th.
Yeah, that's definitely a tight one we will be looking at. So aside from the election denying, voters really voted against that profoundly. Do you think that's the only reason that this red wave that the GOP touted really never materialized?
I think, no, I don't. I think it has a lot to do with January 6th. Above any one human being, above any politician, I think most Americans value democracy and this republic over anything else. And I believe that people saw January 6th and Donald Trump's, whatever his involvement was in that, as an existential threat to our democracy. And so the American people told the politicians that, hey, this is not what we want, this is not what we stand for, and we're not going to stand for it.
So speaking of Donald Trump, he made an announcement recently. He is going to be running for president in 2024. So all eyes are on 2024 right now. But many in the GOP really pinned the blame on him for this red wave never coming to fruition. Do you think it's time for the Republican Party to move on from Donald Trump?
I think the Republican Party is already beginning to move on from Donald Trump, right? So you have January 6th happen. That was sort of the culminating event of his presidency. People will not forget that. Americans have a very short memory, but this one thing, I can't imagine us forgetting that.
Yeah, even right after his announcement, Joe Biden put out a tweet with a video of Donald Trump, and there was mentionings of January 6th in there. So while the past week, you're starting to see this turning away from Donald Trump, but there's a new star rising in the GOP, and that's Ron DeSantis. So he handily won his reelection campaign against Democrat Charlie Crist. Do you see him as a really formidable contender in the 2024 election?
You know, anything is possible. I think that any Republican who wants to have any chance, they have to pull away from Donald Trump. They have to change their tune, change their rhetoric. So, but anything is possible.
Speaking to that, so far the conversation has largely focused on this Trump versus DeSantis war within the GOP. So are there any other dark horse contenders that you could see being a real challenger here?
I think that that Donald Trump is certainly going to be attacked from the right. You have Mike Pence, who possibly may run. Of course, you have DeSantis, who may run. So he's going to be attacked from the right. But I frankly do not see Donald Trump. If I'm a betting man, I will bet the house on the fact that he's not making it out of the primaries.
So we're already talking about 2024, but the midterm elections in 2022 were just last week. So what lessons do you think both parties can take from Election Day moving forward to the next 2 years?
Sure. I think for the Republicans, again, you need to turn your back on Donald Trump, run away, and run on inflation. Again, people have more month at the end of the money as opposed to the other way around. And so if you're talking about gas prices, the price of eggs and the price of milk, then regular everyday people are going to connect with that. If you want to win, that's how you win for the Republicans. The Democrats, same thing. It's a lot tougher for them because there's a Democratic president in office. You have the entire government outside of the U.S. Supreme Court was Democratic for the last couple of years. So it's a tough challenge for the Democrats. The thing that they have in their hands or in their hats is that if they could connect Republicans to Donald Trump, they have a better chance. So the Democrats have to connect the Republicans to Donald Trump, and the Republicans have to connect the Democrats to this tough economy that we're in.
For those everyday voters, economy is obviously top of mind. What other issues do you think they will face or that will be a big deal for voters at the ballot box in 2024?
I think the top three issues, number one is the threat to democracy. I think that's very much at the top of people's minds. Number two is certainly the economy and inflation. And number three, one of the hot button topics, abortion. People care about abortion. It's a long-standing issue, and people care about it. So I think those are the top three issues that voters are taking to the polls with them.
Great. Well, Drew Benbow, thank you so much.